Hello, everyone. Welcome to this TestRail webinar. Today, we are here to talk about OpenAPI specifications in service of testing, because we are all for testing. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy this session. So API testing, what is an API before anything? An API is an application programming interface, and it's an intermediary that allows two applications to talk to each other. So you can talk, you can have a client application and a server application, and you can talk to the server through requests and responses using their API. So usually we talk about, when we talk about API testing, we are talking about HTTP APIs that use the HTTP protocol. But an API can be a lot of other things. So for instance, if we are talking about coding, an API can be simply the methods that a class exposes. But right now we want to talk about HTTP API. So let's focus on that. And API testing. Well, API testing is a type of software testing that exercises an API to assess whether it meets its requirements, functional and non-functional. So you can do functional tests, you can do other tests, you can do performance, security, among other things, and you definitely should, because it's very important to assure that all that is very tight. And it's usually done against either internal services, in case you are using microservices, for instance, a microservices architecture in your applications, or you can test your public APIs as well. And usually you see the tests in form of requests using the HTTP verbs, such as post, get, put, delete. So this would be the flow for a CRUD, for a create, update, read, delete test. So in this example we have here, we would post to the pets endpoint, which would create a pet. We would get that pet. We would do a put to edit the pet. We would do a delete to delete the pet, and we can check that the information is all being consistently saved. We could check things for things like authentication and a couple of more things. And what about OpenAPI specifications? What are these? What's the OpenAPI initiative? Well, according to the OpenAPI initiative documentation, the OpenAPI specification defines a standard programming language agnostic interface description for HTTP APIs, which allows both humans and computers to discover and understand the capabilities of a service without requiring access to source code, additional documentation, or inspection of network traffic. So it's basically a readable format that is both readable for humans and computers. So humans can use it as a communication layer. You can use them, for instance, to design an API and to sort of trade ideas and review the API design, etc. And then computers can, for instance, generate code from that specification, among a lot of other things, which we are going to see next. And it usually looks, well, at least part of the specification looks something like this. So you may see, for instance, a path, which is the pet path, the /pet path, which is the path on your URL. And then for that path, you have a post operation. And inside that post operation, you can have some properties like the summary, the description. These are mostly metadata, but then you have the possible responses. So you have a 201 if a pet was added, you have a 400 for an invalid input, and then you can also define what the request body is going to be. So in this case, we don't have the explicit request body, we have a reference. So these specifications also allow you to have reusability. So you can define what a pet is somewhere and then reuse that model along your specification. So it's very versatile. It does take some time to get used to. You need to learn how to build it and how to build each path, each request, etc. But after a while, it becomes very, very intuitive. And you also have tools to help you do that. So it's a big plus, because a lot of people are now using OpenAPI specifications, and tooling is evolving really fast. So API specifications, what can we use these for? Well, you can use them for a lot of things. So for instance, for development, you can implement an API based on a specification, on an OpenAPI specification. So you can use it as an API design doc. So like I was saying, you can communicate with other people, you can work collaboratively on this document, you can review the document, etc., until you come up with a final version before going into implementation. So everything is quite solid. You can also implement an application against mocks based on a specification. So for instance, imagine that you are writing your client application and also the backend at the same time. The client, the UI part of the application is going faster. You don't actually need the backend. You can use the specification to generate mocks and test your application against those mocks, because you know that that's supposed to be what the backend is going to get you to the UI. And you can also, for instance, auto-generate an API client. You can even auto-generate a server itself. There are tools that allow you to do that in a couple of different languages. Then you can also use it for documentation. A lot of companies are doing this right now because it allows you to auto-generate user-friendly documentation. There are a lot of platforms right now, or tools, some free tools in the market, as well as some platforms, software as a service platforms, that allow you to upload your OpenAPI spec and then customize a little bit to come up with very cool documentation, live documentation, documentation that stays up to date, and documentation that sometimes even allow you to actually execute the requests and simulate the requests. And it also allows you to have code snippets and examples, for instance, examples of the requests you can do for different scenarios. So OpenAPI supports all this. And finally, and not less importantly, testing. So you can use the specifications as a test oracle. So you look at the specifications, you are testing a service, an API, and if something doesn't match the specification, well, either the specification is wrong, or the application has a bug, or is not well implemented, is not following your standard. So you should definitely look into what's happening. Maybe you have to update the specification, but doing this, you are sure that everyone is on the same page. So if the specification is added, then okay, there was a mistake. We make mistakes. But a lot of times, most of times, I would say the error will be on the actual application. Other things you can do, you can auto-generate a test skeleton, for instance. So you can, from the OpenAPI specification, you can extract test cases. You can also auto-generate API clients, same as for development, but for testing. And you can even do contract validation in automated testing. So using these specifications, there are simple tests you can do that instead of writing code to check property by property, you can just say, hey, check this JSON I got against the specification, and it will tell you all the differences, and it makes it very easy to find contract breaches. So without further ado, let's go straight to our demo time. So this was just a very brief introduction to API testing, APIs, and OpenAPI specifications. But what I really want to show you today is how you can leverage these specifications, what kind of tooling is available in the market, and then we'll finalize with what we are planning for TestRail using our TestRail CLI. We have some new features planned using API specs. So let's go straight into this. We are going to start with ReDoc. ReDoc is very popular for documentation generation right now. Swagger can also be used as documentation generation and also as a sort of a client. Then we are going to see VS Code. There are plenty of extensions you can use in VS Code to both write and also see the end result of OpenAPI specifications. How to use them using Postman as well. Postman is well, it's a classic for testing APIs, either manually or you can even automate your tests using Postman as well. Then some Python projects, and finally our new TestRail CLI. So here I'm using VS Code just to show you the OpenAPI. So an OpenAPI can look something like this. So let me just collapse the sections here just so we can have a high-level view of the sections of an OpenAPI specification. I don't think I mentioned it, but it's a YAML file. Before anything, it's a YAML file. where you can specify what your servers will be for your API. Right here, I'm using my local host. I have the pet store API running on localhost. You can also test the pet store API. It's a very common test target, because if you look for pet store API on Google, it will immediately show you their page, and you can just do requests against their API, or you can grab a Docker and run the Docker in your local machine, and from there you can also start testing. So right here, I have it running on a Docker on my local machine. And then what we have is some information. This is mostly metadata that is going to be displayed on your documentation, like the description, where you may have an introduction, how to authenticate, etc. Then you have the version, the title. You can add things like terms of service, contacts, etc. Then you have also the external docs section, where you say, okay, you can also check our external docs. And then you have a text section. Tags are mostly used to organize your resources. So you can say you have, in this case, we have pet and store resources, and these are going to be displayed in sections according to the tagging of the endpoints you have, of the resources you have. And finally, well, not finally, but then we also have the paths, which is the most important part. This is where you actually write the properties for each resource. And we can see that it starts with a pet path. So this is the path on your URL. It would be something like localhost-v2/v2/pet. And then you can use a post method to create a pet. It says add a new pet to the store. Then you have the responses, 200 and 400. This one should actually be 201, but that's okay. You can also say what kind of security you have, what kind of permissions you need to have to execute these requests. And then you just go on with other verbs, other operations for your resources. Oh, and one more thing we can also see is, the reference. These references are reusable components. So what we can see is that these references also exist in this file. In the component section, we have the schemas. And for instance, let me find my pet schema. I have my pet schema here, and this is reused across multiple resources. So we can just write what a pet is once and then reuse it. So we were going to start with ReDoc. I was just showing you the basics of how an OpenAPI specification looks like. So ReDoc, I already imported my Swagger file here. If you go to this URL on the ReDoc link GitHub, you can upload the file, so a YAML file like this one. They already have a sample one when you open this, but I uploaded mine, and we can see our tags here on the left, which are organizing our resources. There's the introduction with what this API is about, with authentication, how to do authentication, and then we start these sections. And for each section, we have like very readable, very prettified representations of the specification. So here for the add a new pet to the store, we know that we need to do a post to the pet path. There is also a sample payload here that you can use to run a test. You also have the response samples here. So whether it's a 200 or a 400, you could also have a payload for the 400 or not, depending on your API design. And you can also see things like for each property, what you can test or not. So for instance, the name is required. So you probably should have a test where you make sure that the name is required. For tags, for instance, you know that it must be non-empty. So if you test with an empty tag, it shouldn't allow you to create a pet. Photo URLs, it must have less than 20 items. So if you have more, you should test having more than 20 items. So doing a boundary test here. And for instance, statuses, they must be one of these. So you should also test with different statuses and see if your API reacts the right way. And you can check this for all kinds of different resources with all the verbs you have here. But right now, let's go and check what the Swagger editor gives us. This is also available online on editor.swagger.io. And for instance, if I copy my OpenAPI spec here, I can see that it automatically generates a Swagger UI. Some of you may be familiar with the Swagger UI. There are development frameworks that allow you to generate a Swagger UI from your code, from your implementation of your server, of your API. And here we can see the sort of the same information like we had on ReDoc, but in this case, we also have the ability to try it out. So for instance, you could just, let me get a simpler one. So for instance, find pets by status. We can try it out, and straight from here, we should be able to do the request, and we get the response, and we see the response for this endpoint here. We can see that it returned the 200 status code. Okay, but these are the possibilities. There's the 200 and there's also the 400. So there's a lot you can explore and play around with, especially if you're just starting with API testing and you don't have a lot of coding skills. This is a great way to start just trying out your API, although it is a little limiting because, for instance, here, I can't actually send a status that is not here. So if I wanted to test with another status, I wouldn't be able to do it here. So that's why you need actual testing tools instead of just using this. This sort of guides you through how to execute the requests correctly according to the API specification. So it's good to play around with, but not so good for actual testing. And this also offers some other things. So for instance, if I change this post, if I do a typo here and I write posts, I will probably get an error here. So it actually validates the API spec. It tells you, hey, you have an error here. And you can see, oh, okay, that's true. I had an error here. But there's a couple of things you have here. You can also generate servers in different languages, generate clients as well. We'll look into this in just a few moments too. But let's now jump back to VS Code. So in VS Code, you can actually have both ReDoc and Swagger using an extension. There are plenty of extensions for OpenAPI, like you can see here. There's one even like really from ReDocly. There are a couple of them here. I'm using this one, which is the most popular one, OpenAPI Swagger Editor, and it has a lot of cool features. I already installed it, and I'm going to walk you through how it can improve your work with OpenAPI specs. So, okay, so what does this give us? This gives us a couple of different features. A cool one is this menu here on the left, where we can actually have a cooler view of what's going on with the specification, a more collapsed sort of view. So for instance, I can see all my paths, I can see the information, I can navigate to the information too. Right now this is all collapsed, but let me expand this. So I can navigate to the information, to the text, to the external docs. So this is good for navigation and to have an overview of your things. So here I can also see that inside pet I have the post and the put verbs. These are operations actually. I can even create a new one straight from here, for instance, if I wanted to. Well, actually it just created it. So it has like a boilerplate here. Right now we don't want it, so we are just going to delete it. So it has a couple of productivity tools here for you to use, which is very cool. And you can also see, for instance, the components. So you have like the request bodies, you have examples, you also have, well, the best part is the schemas part, where you have like what your pet is, for instance, with all the properties, etc. And right here, it also allows you to navigate. So if you click Control and then click this, you can navigate to the object that the reference refers to. So some cool features here. It also helps you write stuff. So for instance, let's say here on the content, you could start typing application, and it gives you some other possibilities like JSON, that stream, etc. So if I just do this and I hit Control and space, it also gives me some other options like headers. We are not defining headers here, but it does help. And if you do a mistake, like you have a key that doesn't make sense in a particular place of the specification, it will also show an error here and your specification is invalid. So quite a few things you can play with. And if you use this button, then this preview button, you can also see the Swagger straight inside VS Code. So you have your Swagger here. Once again, we can try it out as well. So you can execute the request and the request works. So you can play around a little bit and you can have a preview, because a lot of times it's always harder to look at the file. It's easier when you actually see what it's going to look like in a Swagger or a ReDoc format. If you go to the configuration settings, you can also change between Swagger and ReDoc if you like ReDoc better. So yeah, lots of cool things here to help you start creating your OpenAPI specs if you are designing an API, or maybe if you are just reviewing an API, you can just paste it here and see if it has errors and other inconsistencies. Or if you are testing, you can just start playing around with an API too. And it also has another feature, but this one requires a license that would be using 42 Crunch to do an audit here. And you would have some hints about problems with your design, with security, etc. So also very cool. If you're using 42 Crunch, you could also use that from here. So about VS Code, I think I've walked you through all I wanted to. So next in the agenda, we have VS Code. Okay, Postman. Let's go straight to Postman then. So I was walking you through how to look at the OpenAPI spec, how you can preview it, how you can write it, etc. And now we are going to see how you can use it for your actual tests. A very popular tool, like I mentioned, it's Postman. I've used it a lot during my career, and it's very cool to get started with testing. Eventually, I moved to a more programmatic approach, but it's very good to start. And if you have to do just some quick tests, this is great. And what Postman allows you to do is to import OpenAPI specifications. So for instance, I'm going to select my file. So the pet store API, and I'm just going to import it. Yeah, here. Okay, so it's importing. And here we go. We have our API imported here. So we can start by looking at some documentation. So this also shows you the documentation formatted in a pretty way. We can also see our endpoints here. It also has another way to display the endpoints, the resources you have. It also shows you the properties, etc. here. If you click here, you also can see the actual file. You can see the paths, etc., similar to what we had in VS Code. And here it also gives you some hints, I believe. So if this isn't right, it will probably find a violation. So yeah, there you have. There's a violation syntax here, a syntax violation here. So let me revert this. It also gives you like the navigation and a couple of other things. You can play around with this, but right now let's go straight to actually executing some requests. So let's start going to the pet requests here, and we can start by adding a pet to our pet store. So we are using this post, add a new pet to the store. It's a post to the pet path, so the path is here. The base URL is what I had in my specification as well. So we can just add the body here. It already has an example body here, but we are just going to add our own body here, the body we want. And this is like if I was actually testing this API. It's like a real example of testing the API. So I'm going to create a pet, which is named Mr. Peanut Butter, because I like BoJack Horseman. And I'm going to say the status is none for this pet. Remember that the pet had a status which could be available, etc. And I'm just going to create it just like this. I can just create a pet. And there we go. The pet was created. I have my pet ID here. The name of the pet is correct according to what I sent. This is the response, by the way. It was a 200 status code, so it was okay. There are no photo URLs, no tags, and the status is none. And one cool thing here is that you immediately see this warning here, and it's warning you that you have issues. Well, the request was okay. There was no error with the request from an applicational perspective, but there are issues when it comes to analyzing the OpenAPI specification. So if you click here, you'll see there are two issues on the request body. So there is a property, it should have had the property photo URLs, and the status should be one of the allowed values, and I sent one that wasn't allowed. And then on the response body, the tags were empty, and they should have at least one item, like we also saw. And the status, well, we sent an invalid status, so it returned that same invalid status. So this should probably be all accounted for on your API implementation. It shouldn't allow you to do these things, or else the API specification is wrong. So you can immediately find these issues. But yeah, everything is fine. You just need to alert that there are these issues here. And other than that, you can also add some tests. So in Postman, you can also have tests. I'm going to add a couple of tests here. Like, for instance, the pm.test defines a test. This is a little more programmatic. It's a little more advanced, but it's also easy to understand. So I want to make sure that the name and status is returned for my pet. So I'm going to get the JSON data from the response JSON, and I'm going to say that I expect the name to equal Mr. Peanut Butter and the status to equal none. And I'm going to say that the ID should be returned, so it should have a new, it should not be null. The JSON data ID should not be null. And I'm also going to set a global variable so I can use my new pet ID in one of the next requests. This is going to be for when we actually run everything in one go. So let me save this. This would be the usual tests I would do, but we can also see that if I send this request again, everything was okay. The test results, they all passed, but still there are issues when it comes to the contract, to the validation against the OpenAPI spec. This doesn't actually catch that sort of issues. But now let's try a different request. So now that I have created my pet, I can use a find pet by ID and find that pet by the ID. So we saw that the pet ID returned was, okay, 16. So I'm just going to add the 16 to my path parameter here. And I'm going, it doesn't need a body or anything, it just needs the parameters, which should be the pet ID. I just added this here, and I'm going to do a get. And once again, we have the warning here that this isn't right. And now we are going to actually validate this against the OpenAPI specification. So Postman doesn't actually allow you to use the OpenAPI specification as is. It does have a validator for, if you look here on this right-hand panel, there is a tiny validator for JSON data. This uses a JSON schema validator, which is very much compatible with OpenAPI spec. So if you convert from YAML to JSON, you will be able to actually validate against the schema. Unfortunately, Postman doesn't allow to validate automatically. It would be cool if you could just say validate against my OpenAPI schema, and Postman has everything it needs to actually do that. But it doesn't do that yet. I heard they were going to implement it, but right now it doesn't. So we need to do this manually. But what I would do would be add a test. I would test that the schema is valid, and I would have my schema here, my JSON schema, which has the type, which it needs to return. So it's an object. And in that object, the properties must be the name, which is a string, and the status, the type of the status is string, and then it must be one of these values. So it's going to validate this. And then I just actually execute the validator. This is just boilerplate code. And if I now execute this, we can see that the test failed. So there is an error here. The schema is valid, test failed, and there is an assertion error. And we should be able to see that error in the console. Not exactly sure where the console is now, but let me try to find it here. So view Postman console. Okay, here it is. And there we go. And we can see the error here on the console, and it says no enum match for none. So there was an error here where we had the none value. So we can see what the error was. If you want to use Postman to actually set up automated tests, so this is how I would do manually. I can add these tests, but if I want to run them, for instance, in a pipeline, this also allows you to do that. So to do that, all you have to do is, first of all, let me try to add some tests here. Okay, I want to run, wait, not the collection. Let me try to run just this. Now I have to do a run collection, and this opens the runner window here. I can run manually, or then for a pipeline run, you can automate the runs via the CLI, etc. But right here, we just want to use two of our requests, the requests we just implemented. So that would be the post request. So I'm going to move the post request up there, and then the get the find pet by ID request. And I'm going to check both. Actually, one little thing I forgot. So I set this variable, the new pet ID. So to chain the requests, what I need to do is to actually set the ID variable here. So this is what I would do. So between double brackets, double curly braces, we just add this and we save the request. And now if I execute my runner, I can see that I have my results here, and this is how you can automate tests using an API spec and Postman in a very simple and fast way. So Postman, that's what I wanted to show you for Postman, and now we are going to quickly dig into something else, which is Python. So Python, I have two projects here. One of the projects, I actually created it using this client generator. From the Swagger editor, I exported a Python client, which should be somewhere around here. Okay, this one, I use this one, and it downloads a zip, which is a Python project, and I have it here on my PyCharm IDE. This is, well, you have to have some technical, more programming skills to do these bits, but it gives you sort of a boilerplate of code. Some people don't like boilerplate code. I'm one of those people, but if you're just starting, maybe this can give you, this can help you out. And for instance, it automatically generates your test classes. So for instance, if you want to test your pet resources, wait, not this, your pet API, this one, it already gives you a couple of tests you should have. So you should have a test that adds a pet, that deletes a pet, that finds a pet by status, etc. So you already have these basic sort of tests. Obviously, you should complement this, but it's a good start. And you have a README file that gives you a lot of instructions on how to use this. So for instance, there's installation and usage. I already installed everything. And then there are some getting started examples. And for instance, we can see that there are examples for instance, deleting a pet, for finding a pet by status. And we can actually try this one out. For instance, just copying this and adding this to this test, find pets by status test. I just copy pasted this code, and all I need to do is probably change the status to one of the valid status, which is available. And it is going to configure the Swagger client. If I needed an access token, I would just have to add it here. And then it instantiates a client for you. And then it executes the find pets by status request, which is already also created. The code behind this is already created using the generator. And let's try to run this and see what happens. And look, just out of the blue, it immediately executed the request. Obviously, you would have to add some validations on top of this, like adding some property validations, status code validation, etc. But just like this, you can start creating tests. So this is an example for a client generator. You can use this client either to test the API or to actually interact with it and create an app to interact with the API. But usually I don't do this. I have my own project where I have my OpenAPI spec validator. I created one. I'm thinking maybe of getting this on a public repository. Right now it's still in development. But in my tests, what I do is, for instance, I can create, this is the test to create a new pet, and I'm going to create a new pet with this data. And okay, I have my status here. This is a valid status. And then I just execute this. I had to create this code behind. Then I assert that the status code is 200, and then I validate the spec. And when I do the spec validation, I just say, okay, validate my response JSON against the pet path for a post for status code 200, because each status code may have a different contract. And then there are a couple of extra properties. Let's not worry about this now. And if I run this test, let's see what happens. Okay, it passed. Everything looks fine. But what if I change this once again? This is an easy error to simulate. So status whatever, and I run my test again. So we can see that it fails the test. And now if I go down here, I can find the error. And the error clearly says there was a validation error. Whatever is not one of these properties. And this works for every property in your OpenAPI spec. So this is a very good way of having at least some basic tests that validate a lot of your contracts, because contracts are also one of the big issues when testing APIs, and especially microservices, which are constantly changing and may break your integrations if you have contract breaches. So this is a very good thing to have in your tests as well. And last but not least, what we also now can do with, well, it will be released very soon, the new TestRail CLI version. And what you can do with it is actually generate tests for TestRail just with an OpenAPI spec and the CLI. So what you do is just call it the TestRail CLI. You need to install the CLI. For whoever isn't familiar, to install it, you just do you need to have Python. It's a Python package, and you just use pip and install TRCLI, and this would install the TestRail CLI. I'm not going to run this because I already have the CLI installed, so I'm just going to run this command here, and it's a very basic command. I just pass on the details for my instance, the project I want to see my tests created in, my test cases. I use the parse OpenAPI command, and then I use this file, which is the spec file. And let's see what happens if we run this. So I'm just going to, TRCLI, OpenAPI parser. I'm just going to run this, and it found 22 test cases. And it's now importing the test cases to TestRail, and we can see them in my TestRail. So I had this project, which was empty. And now if I refresh, I can see that I have a bunch of test cases. They are separated by sections, one for the pet section, one pet section, one star section, and then we have all the combinations of the path with the operation, and then the response, whether it's a 200, a 400. You have the description here as well, so you know this test is for an invalid ID supplied, etc. So just like this, you can quickly create a base of test cases. Obviously, I always advise to expand on this. Right now, it's just creating the names of the test cases, but it will also add some information like the contracts to the test case description, etc. So be on the lookout for this. It will be released very soon. And yeah, we are done with the demo now. I think we can go straight into Q&A. So Norbert Siroc asks, is it possible to upload more files with TestRail CLI, or you can upload only one file at once? Well, right now we only support one file, but that's something we are also thinking of implementing, both for the OpenAPI parser and the JUnit parser. It's something people have been asking, and we are going to add the possibility of having multiple files. So you just need to run the command once and that makes a lot of sense. And you can use a glob pattern, etc., to figure the files you need to parse. So yeah, great question, Norbert. Thank you. And Segi Ettinger asks, why do you need to use TestRail CLI? Well, the TestRail CLI, in case you're not familiar with it, it's a tool that that parses files and creates entities in TestRail. Originally, it is used to parse a JUnit file with test results from automation frameworks, and then create the test cases and submit the results for the test cases. Right now, we are also releasing this feature where you can generate, it's sort of a test case generator based on an OpenAPI spec. So yeah, you can do this manually, but if you have a tool that does this for you, why not use it, right? Well, Irina Volnik is asking, who is the bestie to write the OpenAPI docs, QA or dev? In case of dev, either source of truth will be in hands of dev. The source of truth will be in hands of dev. Well, in my opinion, this should be a collaborative work, especially if you're working in an agile environment. This should always be collaborative. So, and even product, if you have a technical product owner, product manager, even that person can help write the OpenAPI docs. I think it should be a collaborative work. And well, initially it might start with dev, but for instance, QA is a great resource to actually review the spec, to find errors in the spec, to come up with new ideas. Usually in my teams, we all split the responsibility. So we all try to develop these documents and try to share ideas and review them among each other. So anyone can actually do this as well, as long as they have the right knowledge. Hope that answers your question. So Ken Fugate is asking, are the test results updated through the TestRail API, or how do the runs and results get reflected? Yeah, so the TestRail CLI uses the TestRail API. So it's basically an abstraction layer that already has a lot of functionality in it, so you don't need to actually create your custom scripts that interact with the API and have to deal with mapping of test cases, etc. So that's what the TestRail CLI does. So can you please open one of the test cases just to see how the steps looks like? Servan Mijakovic is asking this. Well, I mentioned this. Actually, yeah, I can, but you won't see anything. Like I mentioned, this is a feature that is still under implementation. So right now we haven't implemented this yet, but this will be in the first version. You will have some details here. So what you'll have here are things like execute a certain request and with a certain payload, and the result should follow this contract, something similar to that. And well, this was a great speed run through our questions, and we are almost at the top of the hour. So I'm just going to wrap this up with some resources you can look into. And the resources are this last slide. So a couple of resources like the OpenAPI website, the Visual Studio plugin, ReDoc, Swagger, generators. Well, a lot of stuff here. Do look into this if you want to get more information. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and enjoy the rest of your days, everyone. Bye.